Craveable Podcast, Episode 4, Elk and Venison.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, and welcome to the Craveable Podcast, where real matters. We are your hosts, Ben and Katie, and this show is brought to you by Fossil Farms. We have a topic today that my co-host is just brimming with delight over discussing, and that topic is elk and venison. We're going to talk a lot about it, all different types of information, but I'm going to start with a history of venison, if you'll have me.
Please.
Okay. So it was around 2.5 million years ago.
Wow.
When our ancestors finally developed the tools and also the digestive system to enable them to eat venison. Because obviously they didn't always have either of those things. And by about 12,000 years ago, virtually all of our ancestors were hunter-gatherers. And venison, was definitely one of the main things that they ate. And I think we'll touch on this a little later, but I think it's very interesting that, this was one of the first animal proteins that our ancestors were eating. And all this time later, we've kind of gone away from it, at least in the mainstream sense. And venison itself, well, I could say a bunch of things about venison, but it was originally used to describe all game meats,
right.
Virtually all of them. And now it applies exclusively to deer, except in South Africa, where it also applies to antelope.
Which, in my mind, is also deer-like, right? It's
Pretty
not in
much.
the Cervidae family, so to speak.
That's that word. And speaking of word, you might be wondering, dear listeners, where the word venison comes from. And it actually comes from the Latin venatus, which means to hunt. The word entered the English language through Norman in the 11th century, following the Norman conquest of England and the establishment of royal forests. Interesting tidbit.
It is interesting. And I think it's really interesting that they would have these royal forests, and God forbid a peasant went on that land and caught a rabbit, or if they could, take down a deer and then tried to take that home. That was a big no-no. They probably got put to death, or worse. I mean, going back in history is never a good thing, in my opinion. Things just got rougher and rougher.
And what's interesting about, the venison word used to be used to describe all game is I know I've spoken to people that are, originally from other countries besides the US, and they actually inherently call it deer, and I'm always like, oh yeah, venison, but they actually call it deer. And I'm wondering now if that could potentially be because of, changes over time and in different countries, right. The way that they refer to different proteins.
Probably like a Western-centric version of the word, especially stemming from Latin and then ending up in the English language or going through the other love languages, French, Spanish, Portuguese, etc. And they end up with venison, and then more than likely with people who learn to speak English as a second language and they just hear deer meat. Because venison, I think, kind of brings to mind something different than deer meat. You know what I mean? I think that's kind of part of the problem with the American consciousness is how we look at venison. Like, venison tends to be a bit of a frou-frou word. Like, you're thinking of fine dining, you're thinking of higher end restaurants or more conscious eaters, like, oh, I'm having venison at the chateau this weekend, or the total polar opposite where you think of who has, like, oh, I got plenty of venison in my freezer because I hunt white-tailed deer to sustain myself, in West Virginia. So there's this diametrically opposed idea of what venison is in the public consciousness. Either they think it's something that's too expensive, or they think it's just, something some guy gets out in the woods. But it's really not that. Because the deer meat or the venison meat that people are eating isn't whitetail. It's not mule deer or any of the other 18 different things that we have on this list.
It's like 10. I wanted to talk about the different kinds of deer.
And there's so many. And then, what we're eating is I believe, the second largest cervidae or deer species on the planet, which is the red stag.
It is.
Really exceptional animal. I mean, gorgeous. Like, if you think of like that regal, majestic animal standing on a mountaintop with a huge set of antlers, that's probably more than likely a red stag deer and not definitely not a whitetail and certainly not a moose or even an elk. I mean, the elk species is the Wapiti and the Roosevelt elk being the largest deer species in North America. And these animals are just beautiful and absolutely divine and delicious. I mean, if you can't hear it,
Ben loves these animals.
I love one. I think they're beautiful, amazing creatures. I'm in the woods and I love seeing deer, and I think they're absolutely delicious and really sustainable, healthy, awesome protein.
So, why is elk and venison so awesome? A lot of that does boil down to nutrition. So, elk and venison, elk is part of the deer family. Those
Right.
proteins are super similar. So, going for both of them, when you compare it to 100 grams of beef, venison and elk possess a third of the calories and about 1/30th of the fat. And I mean, those are huge.
Yeah.
Both of them are also super rich in iron. And I don't know what this is, but in particular, heme iron. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but it's HAEM. And that particular kind of iron is easily absorbed by the body, prevents anemia, helps you convert the food you eat into energy. And they're also packed with B vitamins, which are super important for our brain and nervous system function.
And your mood, believe it or not.
And your mood and your energy. And B vitamins can affect everything from like depression and anxiety to skin and reproductive health. So it's really important. And zinc. Zinc is, you get 32% of the average daily requirement from 100 grams of venison, which is
That's crazy.
not a lot of
Yeah.
venison at all. And zinc is super for the immune system. And, all these things are just make both of these animals, a superior source of protein.
It's
That's
just the
great for
best.
your body.
Yeah. And people tend to think of it as a pricey protein. I honestly think if you're looking to eat less meat and eat better meat, that it kind of ends up being the same costs on the plate. Especially, I mean, if you're comparing it to grass-fed beef, it's really not significantly more. And you're talking about something that's grass-fed through and through. You don't have to be like, oh, is this grass-fed grain finished or is it 100% grass-fed like you would with beef where there are those differentiators? The elk and venison only eat grass.
Yeah. And I mean, I will chime in that, we're talking very generally about elk and venison. And there are people that obviously hunt elk and venison. And there are many hunters in the United States hunt white-tailed deer. And so, I mean, it does depend where you're getting your protein from, this grass-fed notion. But one of the best and most admirable companies is First Light Venison, based out of New Zealand. And they're super, super unique. They were actually founded in 2003 with a super transparent business model and the goal to provide the best beef, elk, and venison in the world. And the way they have it structured since the beginning is as a cooperative. So all of the farmers that raise these animals are part owners.
Yeah.
And it makes it so that virtually everyone has an equal stake in the business and level of care and concern for raising these animals the right way. And as you just said, they're all 100% grass-fed, grass-fed and finished. They roam freely on absolutely stunning pastures in New Zealand.
Picturesque.
Yeah, just stunning.
It's everything you think of when you think of like a high-end quality grass-fed
Yeah.
product. It is that.
It
through
is.
and through.
And what I love about First Light is it's not a massive company, and they're not. One of the reasons for that, I mean, they've won literally international awards for their products. I think they won best beef for some of their beef products, and they're not huge. So you might be thinking like, well, if they're so great, why are they not bigger? They don't have any intention of doing everything super fast or the fastest. They just want to do it right.
Right.
And so, when Ben and I think are kind of offhandedly discussing some of these benefits, as Ben mentioned, the grass feeding and the majesty of these animals, we are likely referencing First Light because they're one of the best, if not the best producers of it.
Yeah. And New Zealand in general, I mean, there's different programs for venison and elk out of New Zealand. And I think all of the programs are really good. It's all fantastic stuff, and it all tastes super good. I mean, out of any red meat protein I've eaten since I started working at Fossil Farms, venison and elk were at the top of that list. Beyond beef, chicken, and pork.
Me too.
Even.
I mean, me too.
It's amazing stuff. And
It's
we talk about it
hands
all the time. We have a guy in the room who's recording with us, TJ. He had brought home some elk medallions the other day, and he said they were amazing. And you know what I said to him?
Phenomenal.
I said, TJ, obviously.
I told you.
Obviously.
But you actually said something earlier I wanted to touch on, and I got sidetracked. But you mentioned cost on the plate, which I think is funny because you spend a lot of your day talking to chefs, and you are talking about cost on the plate.
Yeah, it still matters at home, you know?
It does matter at home. I mean, it's what's great. I love the elk medallions. I mean, they are affordable, and it's depending on package size. I mean, this is a specific product we carry, but our Fossil Farms carries rather, but our medallions are 4-ounce portions. And so what I've done before, and it's always amazing, is I get a pack of 3 of them, cook them up, and then my boyfriend and I each have 1.5. It's 6 ounces of protein, and it's so good. Both
6 ounces of meat. It's probably more. It's a good amount of grams of protein. Probably
Oh
like 30
yeah, I
grams
didn't
of protein
mean.
or more.
Yeah, I meant meat. But both of us, like, we sit there, with our plates in front of us, and we're just like, "Oh, this is so good," and you feel good after.
It's not
like
heavy.
you're eating something super clean, and you don't feel bogged down like you would if you ate a ribeye. I mean, it's amazing how much you can consciously and your body subconsciously can react to the quality and the nutrient density of venison and elk.
Exactly. It's one of those things that the proof is in the pudding more so than almost anything else that we carry, with a heavy bias on my part that I love this so much. But you can literally give someone venison or elk, have them eat the steak and be like, do you feel that? And they're like, no. And it's like, exactly, because you're not supposed to feel anything. You're not supposed to feel overwhelmed and full and sick. You feel satiated, which is such an important thing when you're talking about eating healthy, is that you don't want to just be munching on lettuce and then 30 minutes later being starving. You want to have something that is satiating. You're eating basically pure protein, digesting it, getting all those nutrients, and you feel great about it. You're not going to be hungry later. I mean, I'm going to go on some tangent, so we'll pivot to another topic that we want to talk about. But
I actually want to touch on one thing. Both of us are sitting here saying, "Oh, it's so delicious, so delicious."
What does it taste like?
That's exactly where I was going, because I know we discussed, I mentioned it's strange how our ancestors were eating these proteins billions of years ago, yet we've kind of separated.
Millions of years ago.
Millions of years ago. But we kind of have become a little bit separated from that in modern day. And I know a lot of people I speak to just personally who haven't had proteins like this are a little bit hesitant because they think it's going to be gamey. Now, what's interesting is I've had in the past, many years ago, a friend of mine, her and her husband had been hunting, and she had a bunch of deer, and left over, and she gave me some out of her freezer. And it was actually pretty gamey to the point where I found I wasn't able to keep eating it. And that was, of course, we're here in New Jersey. Most of the deer that are hunted in America are whitetail. So that's what it was. And, I found that I really do not like gamey products. I don't like a gamey flavor. I'm completely put off by it. And all the game meat that I've had, in my time with Fossil Farms, I've liked virtually all of it. With very few outliers, because it's super clean.
Yeah.
It does not taste funky. It does not taste
It's a controlled
gamey.
environment on the farm.
That's
it's
why.
a superior product because they can control it start to finish. It's not down in South Jersey eating grass grown over a Superfund site.
Yeah,
where
exactly.
chemical companies like DuPont dumped chemicals for years and were trying to clean it up. I mean, those are still open to wild animals, and those wild animals, you don't have that level of control. And is there something to be said about, a truly wild product that it's as naturally grown as possible? Yes, but if human beings hadn't destroyed the environment, I might agree with you. Using a controlled, pristine environment produces a pristine product. And to your point, it eats so clean. Like, there's barely any of that kind of like minerality that people might associate with gaminess. I think most people think of that like kind of livery, kind of bloody taste with the gaminess. This doesn't have that. Not unless you cook it into shoe leather, which would be a shame. And I hope you're not doing that. But it ends up being, especially the elk. I mean, I think that's my favorite protein. And I do love, 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 love venison, but the elk is just ever so slightly beefier without a little bit of that sweetness. It tastes like beef.
Yeah, it
It's
definitely
crazy.
does. And I, I agree with all of that. You mentioned my list of breeds of deer, and I am going to run through it, even if you don't want me to.
It's a
happening.
long list. I think it's worthwhile differentiating the different species.
Well, so I thought this was interesting when I looked this up because I really don't know. I could not tell you the different types of deer. I really just know red stag, whitetail for the most part. So here are the breeds of deer that exist in our wonderful world. So, of course, we have whitetail, most popular deer to hunt in North America, as I said. Then you've got black-tail deer. They're found in the hills of Central California. They have a distinctive black tail on top, and it's white underneath. You have coo deer. Again, I might be mispronouncing that, Coues. And you can find those guys in the southeastern mountains of Arizona. Mule deer, which I think I've actually watched a couple shows where they hunt them. They're supposed to be really good, but those are found in generally the deserts of North South America. You've got our buddy, the red deer, which is one of the larger breeds next to elk, and they're mostly native to England, southern Scotland. You have axis deer, which are interesting and kind of cute because even as they grow up, they still have those little white spots that the does have. Yeah, so even the grown deer look like does, and they're mostly in Texas. You have elk, which is a species of deer, and which is why we're including it in this lovely episode.
Yep.
Reindeer, who could forget them?
Yep.
And then, of course, the last one.
And caribou, which I think is similar to reindeer, right?
Probably.
I think it's a little bit different.
But this last one is super interesting. It's the vampire deer. So they're found in Siberia or the Himalayas, excuse me. They don't have any antlers, but they have these super long, sharp fangs that come down and kind of curve, and they look freaky and vicious, but they're kind of smaller. And
so they're really cute.
They're actually
like the little buck teeth.
They're not buck teeth. They're like long, little sharp fangs.
Yeah. Are those Sika deer? That's the same species, I think. Sika.
I'm not 100% sure.
We'll do our research for the next episode.
Well, yeah, but they're actually super shy and harmless. Like they're one of the shyer breeds of deer, which I thought was really funny. So anyway, I mean, you could obviously
more shy than like a regular deer, right? The other deer went up to me. He shook my hoof.
Yeah, but no, I mean, it's interesting, the different kinds of deer. And I know that in some areas, like I know in Canada, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know which way it goes, but I believe the law is that you can call and label elk venison.
Yeah, and not the other way.
And you can't label venison as elk. But I've always thought that's interesting because they're part of the same family. But I know a lot of elk I've seen sourced from Canada is labeled venison, and people are like, "Wait, what? Which is this?" And
it's deer meat. It's actually elk, but they label everything as venison because it's all under the deer family, and it does get confusing. I mean, that'll touch on a larger topic if we ever talk about standardization in meat in general. We literally don't have time for that now.
But I wonder if that stems from venison being used for everything. You know what I mean?
And that's exactly to the point in the beginning, is that it's kind of a catch-all. And that's hence why we kind of specify what species that we carry, or why I don't like when people ask us just for deer meat, because I'm trying to figure out exactly what you're looking for. You know what I mean? Or do you know even kind of what you're looking for? Do we now have an opportunity to educate each other? And I can tell you how freaking good this stuff is. Again, my mouth is going to be watering for the next 30 minutes thinking about it.
Well, what's interesting about whitetails, I know I've spoken to a lot of people who have reached out looking to buy whitetail deer. And alternatively, a lot of people who think that the deer we're selling is whitetail deer. And what's interesting is in the United States, you can't legally sell whitetail deer.
Yeah,
it's
not hunted whitetail deer, right?
It's not legal. And as far as I know, I mean, I don't really believe there are whitetail deer farmers.
Not that I know
in
of.
the U.S.,
no.
I don't believe so. So
I think the yield would be terrible. It's a very small deer. Yes, deer looks so big, or if you hit a 170-pound deer with your car, looks like it did a lot of damage. But like the farm-raised deer, a red stag, that's like a 500-pound animal. This thing is gigantic.
And so that's why, I mean, there really isn't such a thing as whitetail deer farms. And because you can't sell wild hunted whitetail deer, no, you can't. You're not going to be able to purchase white-tailed deer in the United States unless you have a buddy who's a hunter. I mean,
Mhm.
you may find some sources online that claim you can buy it. And my response to that would be that is highly questionable at absolute best.
Yeah, buyer beware.
Yeah, but those are the regulations, and that's why, most companies are selling the red stag, because that is the deer that makes the most sense to raise and for its meat, at least.
And then I think we should also talk about kind of, the economies of scale. Everybody eats beef. It is so popular that we cut down the Amazon to raise beef, blah, 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 blah. But would venison and elk really be that expensive if we raised it at the same volume that we raise beef? Probably not, I mean, it would be way less detrimental to the environment. It would be better for people. It's just a matter of getting the public consciousness to bridge that gap between super high end and super low end. And I don't know why that is. I mean, we as a company struggle to get people to, no, we don't struggle at it. We're actually really good at getting people to eat game meat because we know it's good, and all they have to do is try it and then they switch over. But there is something in the public consciousness about what deer is, and that could be due to movies and media and things like that. But if they just had more of it available, then it would be cheaper and it would be readily available. You wouldn't have to ask your hunter friend for some who knows what kind of whitetail that they have in their freezer from the last year and a half or longer.
And I think, I feel like I'm jumping around here and bouncing back, but you were talking about the flavor, compared to, of the farm raised animals compared to a white-tailed deer that you found in South Jersey. And the way I've always explained that to people who ask me about the flavor of a lot of these farm raised game meats is, when something is wild, it's virtually doing whatever it wants. The lifestyle it wants, the area it's in, most importantly, what it eats. And you also don't have any control over the age of that animal. So,
Oh, I didn't even think about that. It's super important.
Yeah, it's a huge, it's not, maybe not the most warm and fuzzy topic, but, the older an animal gets, the tougher the meat is inherently going to become. And so when you farm raise an animal, you can, I think I mentioned in one of our previous episodes how a lot of New Zealand farmers of animal products or animals, they think of themselves and refer to themselves as grass farmers because it's literally all about the grass and keeping the grass super healthy, rotational grazing, making sure the grass is in tip-top shape at all times. And that's what these animals are eating literally for the entirety of their lives. And that's why you have this beautiful, gentle, clean, and mild flavor.
Yeah.
And the age thing as well, which results in supreme tenderness. So let's talk about cooking venison, because that's another huge barrier, I think, for people.
Yeah, for sure.
What am I going to do with it?
There's a barrier that people would have to get over that I'll start with. And if you don't like to eat rare or medium rare meat, I would argue that you shouldn't eat any red meat. In fact, I'm going to tell you, don't eat red meat if you cook it over medium rare. Please don't do that to us and to the animals. They might be able to cook it to medium. If we're talking about like a ribeye or maybe some sort of like London broil or something where you got enough like intramuscular fat.
But I generally,
or if you're doing like a roast and you're just cooking it all the way till you're pulling it apart, short ribs, things like that.
Mhm.
But if you're doing a fillet of beef, are you really going to cook? People order well done fillets and it breaks my heart. But I think the big thing for eating non-bone-in cuts of venison and elk is that you must eat it rare or medium rare, or you're going to ruin the integrity of the products. And it tastes super clean. I would eat raw venison and it just tastes super clean. We've done it many times. Yeah.
I think that's a huge part of it, though, because I've spoken to so many people that are getting anything, a burger, stew meat, a steak of elk and venison, and they're just like, but how do I cook it? And my answer is pretty much the same every time. And it's, well, you're going to treat it virtually the same way you treat a beef product.
Yeah.
Just be sure not to overcook it.
Yeah.
Be aware it's probably going to cook a little bit faster because there's little to no fat.
Big benefit, in my opinion.
Yeah. And then just I always say, don't go crazy with seasoning because, you and I have had these meats a million times, but sometimes people that, haven't had game before I say you're buying this because you want to taste the flavor of the meat.
Yeah, salt and pepper.
It's salt
and not
pepper.
even that much pepper. You ever do a venison or elk steak at home and you do a decent amount of black pepper, but because there's like no fat as you would with a beef steak, all the heat comes off of that black pepper and you're like, whoa, I overdid it on the pepper. This is like spicy. But if you did that to a fatty ribeye, you wouldn't even notice because the fat's kind of coating your palate and wash away that capsaicin. So my small point of tip would be less black pepper than you think. In fact, very little, because of that lean protein. You're going to get all that flavor off of the meat. Exactly.
Do you want to talk about the cuts of venison? Do you want me to talk about it?
No, I'll let you roll into it, and then I'll just throw out my my 2 cents. Because there's a lot. I mean, then that kind of ties in to what I think is big in sustainable meats, and what I really like about venison and elk programs is that these programs move as whole animals. You don't get, there is no ribeye that you're getting.
Well, exactly.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
And I mean, for the individual consumer, that's not necessarily the case, but a lot of, I know Fossil Farms operates this way. A lot of the best suppliers of these products that care about sustainability and the feasibility of this life of work for the farmer operate on whole animal programs, which means basically that, they don't buy just stew meat or just tenderloins or just backstrap.
They won't let you buy it.
They purchase everything by the whole animal. So purchase 20 whole elk or venison. Of course, those are then going to get processed into the individual parts.
Right.
But the way the purchasing and the sourcing is done is by the whole animal because A, it makes sense. And B, what the heck is the farmer going to do with the rest of those 19 animals when you've just taken all the backstrap?
Right. You need to support these programs in the same way. I love selling the whole animal because I love that variety. You need to sell, go into the cuts. There's the whole saddles.
So what can I start at the top?
Yeah, start.
Let me go head down. So you've got the neck, of course. So that's good for like a roast, a stew, soup, burger, sausage, braise. So a lot of trim there. You've got the backstrap, which is a very popular term. That's actually the loin or the strip loin. That's the same thing as the backstrap.
It's a whole part, and it's kind of confusing for people because normally in a beef cow, your strip and ribeye run into each other, but we don't differentiate between that loin muscle when we're talking about venison.
Exactly. And there's a couple things you can do. That can be bone-in or boneless, but that's a great cut. You can do fillets, steaks, things like that. Then you have the ever-famed tenderloin. No description needed. Unbelievable. Before we end this, really quick, you have to talk about your recipe. The rump, again, similar to the neck, stew, braise, things like that. You got the leg or the round, which is kind of the animal's butt.
But they kind of break those down different for restaurant service.
They do.
Than you would at, say, if you go to a deer butcher or something like that.
Exactly. The shoulder or the chuck, which is front of the animal. The shanks, of course, both front and hind. And the ribs right in the middle. So, Ben, before we wrap this episode to a close, why don't you tell our listeners about your famous elk tenderloin recipe?
My famous elk tenderloin recipe is stupidly simple. It needs a handful of ingredients, and God forbid I try to go to Christmas dinner at my mom's house and I don't make this. But you get most tenderloins for deer meat, be it elk or venison, come 2 per pack. I take both of those. There's very little bit of silver skin. Take that off. And then all you have to do, you get your Le Creuset little cast iron Dutch oven, sear that off. Shallots, morels. If you don't have fresh, you take your dried morels, reconstitute those.
And morels are what, Ben?
Morels are a fantastic mushroom. If you don't know, now you know. Google it. And then I usually reconstitute if I'm using dried with either white wine or cognac. And then it's just garlic, shallots, thyme, reduce your white wine, reduce your chicken stock, ton of heavy cream. Take the seared tenderloins and just lightly braise them in there until they're done. I usually go for like 120, 125. Pull those out, reduce your sauce, strain it if you want. I like to keep it like nice and chunky, really Provençal, we'll call it, with the shallots and morels in it. And this turns into the greatest thing you've ever had because the whole dish is so clean. And because you're eating elk or venison, you can have all that cream in there and you're not going to feel great. You're going to want to take a nap, but it's so delectable. Everything blends in so well. And that cream carries that delicate flavor so nicely between the morels, the shallots, and the thyme, the
Sounds
white
really
wine,
good.
the venison. I have
I'm
pictures
hungry.
on my Instagram,
Oh my
BenL_fossil farm stock. It is so good. It's unbelievable. But I need to ask you, because I know that you usually get more variety. I'm a big fan of getting the legs out of the venison. What's your favorite cut off of these majestic animals?
I mean, it's the tenderloin, definitely.
It's such a cop out for both of us,
Obviously.
but
I
it's
mean,
so good.
but I
It's
don't-
buttery.
But I don't go to it all the time because
Yeah.
it is a larger cut and the price point. And I find just for my lifestyle and, the amount of people I'm cooking for on a regular basis, the medallions are a great option.
Yeah, they're from
They're
the leg.
super easy,
So
super
good.
simple. Yes, they are cut from the leg. But honestly, any way you slice it, pun intended, there are a million different things you can do with venison or elk. There's different cuts. You can adapt either of them to your favorite recipe, and it's an awesome, awesome protein to try and introduce to your diet. So thanks, guys, for hanging with us. Ben loves venison and elk is the takeaway. Just kidding. The takeaway is that these are awesome proteins, super sustainable. We should definitely give them a try. And what you should also do, and don't forget, because it will break our hearts, is like and follow. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next
Thanks.
time.